What is going on, YouTube people? NEOCARDS and Comics here. Today, we are going to talk a little football. Kind of an old school charts and graphs. Probably not a lot of the charts, probably not a lot of graphs, but deep dive some football stuff in market movers today. Just kind of looking at the overall pricing of where everyone kind of currently sits. I noticed just on a quick perusal, there is a lot of green on the price movements pages on a lot of players. Specifically, as always, we usually like to look at Prism Silvers as a general macro level view of how a particular player is doing. It's not perfect, but it works pretty darn well to give you a snapshot of that player's market. And for the most part, over the last 90 days or so, and that's what I went with, most of these guys are in the green. We'll kind of run through the list, talk about some players. I guess my overall arching question for you all is, if we go 90 days forward in time, so 90 days from now, and we look back 90 days from that, how many will still be in the green? Typically, we all know what happens once the season starts. Expectations meet reality, and then things tend to trend down. There are only a handful of cards actually in the red over the last 90 days. I have to imagine if we spin the clock forward and we are sitting here in early November and looking back at the last 90 days, which would show us basically, right at the beginning of the preseason through the first few weeks of the season, what are things going to look like? I am willing to bet there will be a lot more red on this chart. Generally speaking, the best time to exit football is now, especially anyone with baked in expectations. Now, you have a low value flyer, you got some backup quarterback, some project quarterback, maybe a position player even, a little bit of a different story. But if you got big time money and big time quarterbacks, most of the time, it usually doesn't work out pretty well. We have seen this time and time again. Before we dig into some individual players, we have a new sponsor on the channel. Today's video is sponsored by our friends over at the Penny Sleever. Home for supplies, sleeves, top loaders, mags, team bags. They got all sorts of stuff over there. Family-owned company, free shipping, $49 and up, and first-time buyers will get 10% off with code NEOCARDS. All this information will be in the description down below. Very, very good pricing on a lot of the stuff I have been using. They sent me some sample products. I have been messing around with these things for a little over a week now. Penny sleeves, top loaders, semi-ridges, pretty much anything you can think of, they got. I'm a big fan of this little 200 count bundle combo that they have, where you, for 23 bucks, you get 200 top loaders and 200 sleeves. So if you're looking for some supplies, go check out the Penny Sleever. Like I said, link will be in the description down below. You can get 10% off that first order, free shipping over $49, and they have a bunch of other different combos and packages on the website that you can check out. So let's hop back on over to market movers. Top of the list, like I said, the way that I did this, if you're a market movers user, you understand what I'm talking about. Price movements, it's a section of market movers that I absolutely love to look at a lot. If you're not, basically price movements, or you're new to market movers, price movements, I selected football, PSA 10, Prism, rookie, and silver as my search categories. I looked at the last 90 days and then backed it up, or sorted by most expensive to least expensive from last sale. At the top, Patrick Mahomes, no surprise there, sitting at around 4K. Zero movement on this thing over the last 90 days. Has not gone up much, has not gone down much. Just sitting right smack dab in the middle. Even Mr. Mahomes, if he has a slow start to the season, you will see him dip a little bit. We have seen that in the past. Mahomes is probably the one example on this list that has some immunity built into him because of what he has accomplished in his career already. That being said, If they do struggle, you will see his stuff dip down a little bit. We saw it last year, and then it pulled back up as the season went along. Lamar Jackson is number 2 on this list, and some of you might be saying, why is Lamar Jackson number 2 on this list? That seems a little suspect. Why are his cards so expensive? Well, 2018 Silver Prism PSA 10 is only pop 28. 2018 silvers are some of the rarest and hardest to find out of all the recent years of football. So silver prisms out of 2018 go for astronomical sums. Part of the reason why you don't see Josh Allen on this list is because none have sold in the last 180 days. These cards just do not transact very much. So that one, he's up slightly, just given the limited nature of that card. That one would probably be a little trickier in regards to movements. Now, let's get into the new breed. Joe Burrow up about 10%, still sitting over 2K. He had a god-awful season last year. A lot of that, most of it was due to the injuries. He had an injury going into the season and then just was never really right and ended up missing time towards the end of the season as well. He could just not get healthy, and it showed. This card obviously used to be way more expensive. It has come down quite a bit, but 2K still feels pretty pricey. Most of these guys at the top end of the spectrum, other than Mahomes, I am fairly concerned about, just because what have any of these players really done for their cards to be that expensive? You know, I did the comparison the other day of, you know, would you rather have a Stroud or a Wemby PSA 10 silver because they sell for about the same price? I would rather have 2 Wemby silvers than 1 Burrow. That's for damn sure. When you're looking at it like that, you know, if you're going, you know, how many Wembys would you rather have? If that's my litmus test for quarterbacks, I would rather have 2 Wembys than a Burrow, and I really honestly don't think it's that close. I think the Wemby has more stability and more upside than Burrow does at 2K. Next one, and a big drop down. Justin Herbert, PSA 10, pop just under 200. This is one of the few that actually has gone down the last 90 days, and I think part of that is due to he has a foot injury that sounds like it could linger into the season. I believe it's plantar fasciitis, which is notoriously tricky. That Chargers offense has gone over an overhaul through the offseason. His prices at $1,000 for silver PSA 10 would scare the living hell out of me. And it could just be no fault of his own, just the regime change and the fact that he is coming in banged up. That makes me a little bit nervous. I don't like players like this coming in with injuries already. This is already starting to remind me of Burrow last year, and he was just never right the entire season. Trevor Lawrence, also one of the other few to be in the red. I think there's 2 other players in the red. There's a couple that were in the red, but it was like by 30 cents they were in the red. T-Law, ton of hype last year going into the season. Obviously did not live up to it. His prices were way higher. He is another one where the PSA 10, the PSA 9 ratios don't match up. His PSA 10 is notoriously tricky to gem, so it does inflate the price a little bit. I don't know that I'm buying the Jaguars this year, unless they're post-hype sleeper, and some people are trying to pitch that. We're not going to go through every player on this list, but the top ones I kind of wanted to touch on a little bit. Jordan Love, $950 for his silver PSA 10. Yikes. That seems crazy. Now, they're getting a lot of pump this preseason. All the wide receivers are getting talked up. He's got a deep wide receiver pool. They played really well the back half of last season. He was on an absolute tear. Can they carry it over into this season? You know, all that narrative seems a little pricey, but I'm going to say that for most of these guys, because most of these quarterbacks just seem insanely expensive in my eyes. But $950 for a silver prism of Jordan Love just seems a little bit crazy. Now, I will say the pop on that is also fairly low at 166. So that's one thing to keep in mind, are the population counts, because for basically the same price, we see the Stroud silver right below it at 943, also up about 20% the last 90 days. But look at the pop count on that, 1,600 compared to 166. That does matter. That does matter. Don't forget about the supply aspect of this equation as well. Stroud, obviously, tons of pump all off season. Got Stephon Diggs, got Tank Dell, Nico Collins. They brought Joe Mixon in. You know, they had the big run through the playoffs last year. Can they repeat that hype? Can they carry that into this upcoming season? Time will tell. Brock Purdy, $900. This one's a weird one because of all the Ayuk nonsense, so I don't want to spend a ton of time on this one, but up 28% over the last 90 days. We have Taylor Swift up next, basically staying flat over the last 90, but super low pop count on that. 2013 Prism, please. PSA 10 pop, 28. Next to none of those on the population report. Then we kind of dip down to the next tier, the middle kind of tier of guys. We have Jalen Hurts, Tua, Justin Jefferson, Anthony Richardson, all in this $400 to $600 range. AR is getting a ton of hype on him in this preseason. Justin Jefferson, obviously an insane talent. Just saw news today that JJ McCarthy is probably going to be out for a little bit, so it's going to be the Sam Darnold show. We'll see how that affects Jefferson. Tua and Jalen Hurts are definitely talented, but have their flaws. Tua, the concussions scare the hell out of me. Jalen Hurts plays pretty well, has Saquon Barkley back there now, but doesn't get a ton of the credit. Most people attribute it to the system and the weapons that he has around him, and then all the tush-push nonsense. We have one of the position player in Aaron Donald coming in. Only one of those is sold. That's pop 32 on that PSA 10, so not going to do a whole lot with that one. Kyler Murray, another one getting a ton of hype and pump throughout the offseason. Now, over the last 90 days, he's only up a little bit, but if you go back further than that, to the spring, he was actually a lot cheaper. He got a lot of run-up after the draft when they got Marvin Harrison Jr. They've been talking about how he's way more evasive this year, how good Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to be. So the pump machine is working overtime on Kyler as well. Bryce Young coming in there, up 24%, only $240 for his PSA 10 silver. Now you're starting to get to the point where, you know, if you want to take a flyer on someone, there is actually some upside. Now, I don't love Bryce Young, and I definitely don't love the Carolina Panthers, but the price point is right. There is not as much baked into those prices compared to a Joe Burrow at $2K or Justin Herbert at $1,000. The problem with those guys is if Burrow does not go to the Super Bowl, and even then, his cards could still go down just because of the price point is so high. He has to perform so well, and he could. I mean, he has Jamar Chase. He's got T. Higgins. The team is absolutely loaded. But with a $2,000 price tag next to your silver PSA 10, that could be a little tricky. Now, down here at the bottom, we get into more of the bargain buys. We have, I mentioned Bryce Young. We have Will Levis in that $200 range. I would probably rather have Bryce Young than Will Levis. We have Sam Darnold down here. He's one of the other ones going down slightly. A little surprised by that. I wouldn't be surprised if that ticks up now with the JJ news. Sam Darnold at 200. Jared Goff surprisingly at 200. He had a fantastic year last year. Only $200. I would much rather take a flyer on Goff or Sam Darnold than some of the guys at the top of this list. And it has nothing to do so much with the player's talent. It's, you know, what is it going to take for this card to go up to potentially make your money back versus a Burrow or a Herbert? It's going to be way easier. This is going to sound crazy. It's going to be way easier for Jared Goff to double up in price than those guys towards the top of the list. You have a much bigger buyer pool with players like this because the price points are so much lower. Justin Fields been getting a ton of pump lately because of the news that he may be the starter in Pittsburgh. Kind of have to see how that plays out. Once again, we get into the more of the position player world. Myles Garrett, Jamar Chase, Tyreek Hill, all down here. Jamar Chase at $180 seems very reasonable when you consider that Jefferson's PSA 10 silver is almost $500. I love Jefferson. I love Chase. They're both amazing wide receivers. I'm curious. See, Chase is at pop 400 on his PSA 10. What is Jefferson? 125. So I guess that's the difference there. The much lower population count on the PSA 10. That being said, Chase still seems very reasonable at that price. If you believe in Burrow, you might be better off to go after Chase stuff than actual Burrow itself because of the cost of entry into the player. We have Dak Prescott down here, Debo down here, Stephon Diggs down here, CeeDee Lamb in holdout land. We'll see how that resolves itself. TJ Watt, obviously, very, very popular player for the Steelers. And then we get into more of the position players. And now we're in like real crazy territory. Hendon Hooker is going for $150. Deshaun Watson at $150. We'll see what he's going to look like this year. I'm a little skeptical. Puka Nacua down slightly. One of the other ones in red. Once again, I'm going to scroll through this. This is 40 players long. We have him down 10%. We have Sam Darnold down about 15%. And then Herbert and Lawrence. That's it. There's 4 players, basically. I'm not going to count Garrett Wilson being down $150. By the way, Garrett Wilson for $130 also seems very reasonable when you consider his pop report on his PSA 10 is only pop 73. Only 4 players on this list of 40 silver PSA 10s are in the red. That's my main takeaway here. Fast forward, if we redo this list in mid-November, I'm going to go out on a limb and say way more of these are in the red than are in the green. Right now, it is 85% green. Come November, we'll see. Probably going to be a lot of red on this list. Now, will it be 20%, 50%, 60%? Who knows? Probably not that aggressive. But I'm willing to bet this list looks a lot more red come mid-November. This is just almost always what we see with football. Maybe this will be the year to break the trend. Time will tell. We'll find out. As always, curious for your thoughts and comments down below. What names kind of popped out to you on this list that you're like, that's actually pretty cheap. I might actually go chase something on that. Anything really catch your eye? There's a few that caught mine, but nothing super, super crazy. But my general rule of thumb is, outside of Myles Garrett stuff, I usually don't want to own football once the season starts. I like to acquire football throughout the year, offload it at the national, and then just not worry about it. Fantasy football creates enough headaches for me in my everyday life. I don't need PSA 10s causing a bunch of headaches for me either. That's all I got. Catch boys and girls on the next one. Peace.